Welcome into the Trevor Staub Show, episode number 28. Today we have a very special and quite an interesting guest. We have best-selling author Stephen James. Stephen James is an author that I read back in the day and throughout my life. Really great author, also a disc golf fanatic. I thought this would be a really interesting guest to bring on the show, somebody with a unique perspective on the sport that isn't, a huge part of the disc golf industry or a professional player, but somebody who loves the sport and has other outside professional experience. In this case, in the world of writing. Let me know if this is the kind of guest that you like seeing on the show. We've had some kind of like this. Bert Kreischer back a while was kind of a similar style guest to where there are people that aren't necessarily completely familiar with disc golf, but they love the sport and they have a passion for it and want to talk about it. I think it's one of the more interesting guests to bring on because it just is such a shift in perspective from kind of the typical guests we have. So let me know in the comments below if that's something that you enjoy having on the show more often or something that, you're not really a huge big fan of. And either way is fine. I always like having input on this show. But Stephen is a very accomplished writer, has a really awesome creative mind, and hearing his perspective on disc golf was super cool. So let's hop right into the interview. All right, we welcome onto the show now a very special guest. This is a bit of a unique guest for this show, but just to give a little introduction, Stephen James is the author of over 40 books, both fiction novels and writing instruction books. He's won numerous awards for his literary work, including Suspense Magazine's Book of the Year for his novel, The Bishop. But besides all that, he is an avid disc golfer, which is why he's here. Thank you so much for joining the show, Stephen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to set the scene a bit for this interview because a lot of people, I have on guests that aren't all disc golfers, like as far as professionals, but I want to set the scene a little bit. So I found Stephen James writing through my dad, who was introduced me to the Bowers Files series sometime around middle school or early high school. I was never a huge reader, but those books hooked me. So much so that I chose your instructional book, Story Trumps Structure, as my homeschool writing curriculum for the following year. I actually ended up writing my own suspense novel, or starting one at least, and I actually completely copied your writing style. It was it was pretty much like the middle school version of your writing. So I only made it a few chapters in, but as you can tell, I'm a big fan. So when I saw that you played disc golf, I knew I had to try and get you on my show, and that's kind of where I want to start. So how did you learn about this sport in the first place?
Well, I actually started playing back in the day, back in the 90s.
Okay.
So this was when we were throwing at trees instead of actual baskets. And so, in those days, basically, a Stingray was pretty much a distance driver. And so, I started throwing at trees back at this camp that I worked at, and eventually started throwing at baskets and stuff. And the thing is, I was playing in Morristown, Tennessee, just recently, and this guy was like, "Oh, go ahead and throw." So I threw, and he's like, "Man, that's old school. That's how we used to throw back in the '90s." I'm like, "Ooh. Yeah, actually, that's sort of when I learned how to play this game." So anyway, so I've been around it a long time, and I've always enjoyed it. But when my kids were little, kind of put it away for a while because I had to, be around for the kids and stuff. So
sure. Okay,
but over the last decade, I've jumped back into it. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people who kind of stumble upon it and then get back into it now that it's getting a little more popular. But I didn't realize you'd been around the sport for so long. There's not a lot of people. Disc golf has such a small community relative to other sports and a small history that. Saying you played in the 90s, you might not realize it, but you're in pretty rare company. There's really not. It was just, there were only thousands of people playing back then compared to the millions now. Yeah. So that's really cool. So getting into disc golf, I find it interesting. Different people get hooked onto the sport for different reasons. Some love the athletic competition and the simplicity of it. But, as a creative mind and a writer, I was kind of curious to get a peek into your brain. Like, what is it about disc golf that really captured your interest in the first place?
Well, for me, I work a lot by myself. Okay, so I'm a writer, so a novelist, so I basically live in my basement, and you can see like the whiteboard behind me, drawing ideas up and stuff like that. So, so it gives me a chance to get outside. First of all, that's a great thing. Yeah. Hang out with friends, so that's another good thing. Get a little exercise. So I use it as, I do play. I've played a few tournaments, but I'm like, I would rather almost just play with some friends than add any stress of a tournament.
Sure.
Because for me, it's mainly for fun,
Yeah. So, do you have like an athletic background growing up, or was disc golf one of your first like athletic niche hobbies?
Oh my gosh, I played mainly basketball, to be honest. I did some
Okay.
running and track and cross country and so on. So, but I still managed to play basketball, and but between the two, that's kind of my two focus sports these days is disc golf and still playing
Okay.
three on three basketball with some of my
Yeah.
old friends. You know.
Yeah, hey, that I mean, it's a good. I will say, disc golf, is definitely a good sport as you get older to like stay athletically involved, but it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be too strenuous. So one thing I find interesting when interviewing professionals from industries other than disc golf is finding about just how knowledgeable they are about the sport. Because I've talked to other people, who all you see is like, oh, that's a person who is notable and in the media, and I've heard their name, and oh, they know about disc golf, but how much they know about disc golf,
Uh-oh.
because there's so many ways to consume disc golf. You can own one disc and play once a month, or
Yeah.
you can own 100 discs. You can consume disc golf content, follow disc golfs on social media, etc. I know from writing that you're a well-researched man. You like to dive into subjects that you talk about in your books. That's something that you pride yourself on. So, um, any content that you talk about, you have a firm grip on. Have you picked up on the terminology and depth of information that disc golf can offer, or would you say you're more of a surface level hobbyist at this point, which is totally fine?
I'm kind of intermediate, I would say.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, I think I know the terminology, and because I've been around this sport for quite a while.
Okay.
So
So if I say to you, I'm going to throw a hyzer flip here, does that register?
yes,
Okay. Okay.
not great at a hyzer flip, but I totally know exactly what you're saying. Yeah,
Okay, that's more advanced in the language of disc golf than you think. Because I've talked to a lot of people who play the sport every day, and they still
yeah,
haven't quite gotten into that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Do you follow the professional scene at all? Is that something you've looked into?
I mean, a little bit. Yeah, last year it was fun because the World Championship for Masters was actually here in the city where I live, Johnson City, Tennessee, and so.
Okay.
So actually, I volunteered for it. That was pretty fun to be able to see some of the people, some of the players that I'd read about over the years, and so it was kind of cool to see how they played some of the local courses that
Yeah.
that I've enjoyed. Sort of see like the routes that they took, and be like, I hadn't thought of you know
Yeah.
doing that route or whatever, but I'm like, all the pros took it, so it probably makes more sense than the route I've been taking. Yeah.
That's a great point. I've had that same effect before. They had at my home course back in Pennsylvania, they had junior worlds or amateur worlds one year,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and yeah, and I got to see a lot of those really talented players play like the course that I thought I had figured out for all those years.
yeah,
And like I was like, surely there's only one way to play this, and I was wrong time and time again. It definitely paints it in a different picture.
yeah.
So one of your writing strengths, as an author, I feel is character development. Writing these characters that as a reader, you're able to get to know them. You kind of feel as if you're friends with the character. I mean, I certainly feel like I'm friends with a lot of the characters from your books at this
Yeah.
point. So I was just curious if you were writing a book centered around an extremely passionate and invested disc golfer, just knowing what you know about the sport of disc golf, how do you think you would portray them? I'm just curious to see how well it lines up with like what I've seen in the real world.
That's funny. One of the things I always look for when creating characters is dichotomies.
Yeah.
So dichotomy is where you see the character, but there's more to the character than meets the eye, or they have characteristics or intriguing hobbies and so on that seem to be opposite of what you'd expect.
Hmm.
And so, like, if I were creating a character, I would probably try to create someone that it would be like the least likely person that would be totally into the sport.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and so someone where you're like, I would never have guessed that was a thing for him, and as far as like how he would play, probably aggressive, even though I try to play a little more conservative,
Okay.
but sometimes if you play aggressive, you're like, I just live with wherever it lands, but
Yeah.
but of course he would always go for it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
You're more entertaining. That makes sense to me. I never really thought of that from a writing perspective. Like, if you're making characters that are real,
Mhm.
everybody has that secret hobby or that thing that you wouldn't expect them to have. And like, I
Yeah,
guess that it's probably easy to get tunnel vision on a character like to pick an example, you have, a rough and tough guy who's former military.
Yeah.
It's easy probably to zero in on their interest, but I guess it's more real, you would say, to like give them stuff that isn't what people would expect.
Yeah, I hope so. Like I have a new book coming out next year called Broker of Lies, and there is a guy in there who's former military and stuff. But one of the things he's trying to do is like write a romance novel, which
That's great.
he's totally horrible at. Like completely stinks. Like every time that he writes something, it's just cringeworthy. It's like
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember like one of the lines. It's like she felt his hand on her forearm, and he stroked her skin, the largest and most visible organ on her body. It's
Oh
just
my gosh, yeah.
so horrible. So it's been super fun to write, his character, because I can just write totally bad romance, and we all
Yeah.
laugh at it. But he thinks it's good. He's like, "No, what do you think? Is this working?"
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's great. It's like an outlet for bad writing within your
yeah,
writing. Just get it out of there. So, you've got an interview podcast of your own by the name of Story Blenders, which is a
yeah.
great name, by the way, where you talk to other storytellers and gain their insight and perspective on the craft that you've worked in for decades now. I think that's a cool parallel to my show because I don't have nearly the experience, but I too am looking to find personalities and professionals with unique insight on my industry for this show. With that being
Absolutely.
said, what led you to starting that podcast, and what have been your biggest takeaways from a learning standpoint as you've talked to so many successful peers?
Yeah, I guess maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was teaching at a writing conference, and I thought it'd be cool if there was a podcast where you could tune in and listen for free to like some expert advice on writing or storytelling.
Yeah.
And so I ended up starting this, it's called the Story Blender. And so, but over the years, I've interviewed almost 200, of the best-selling authors and storytellers in the world. And so it's been kind of a little bit selfish for me because I get to basically pick the brains of some of the best storytellers
Sure.
that are alive. And so, I mean, even if no one else listens to the podcast, at least it's my opportunity to say, okay, tell me how to write or tell a great story. And
Yeah.
so, as far as takeaways, you know, a lot of people are taught that whenever you start writing, you should outline your story or plot it all out or plan it all out and then basically start kind of filling it in. And I don't write that way. Like I've never known the ending of a book when I've started writing it. It's always organic and it always evolves as I write. And I've found that, a surprising number of other authors really approach stories that way. Like they write
Mm.
organically. They don't really plot everything out or plan it out. And I think that's a little bit different from what most people would expect because they're always taught that you're supposed to outline, plot out your stories and so on. But many of us, we don't do that at all. We write and kind of watch the story unfold as you write it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. Story trumps structure,
Yeah.
organic writing. I know about it. Um, so, stepping backwards a bit, before becoming a critically acclaimed author, you actually went to school for storytelling. In
Yeah.
fact, you earned a master's degree in storytelling at East Tennessee State. I didn't even know such a degree existed until I saw that. What led you to pursuing such a unique degree, and how did you find that program?
Yeah, like back in the day, that's back in the 90s, I basically was working at this camp as a program director. And I loved the camp. I loved being outdoors. I loved doing the activities, creativity and stuff like that. But I was like, I feel like maybe there's something different for me to do. And I heard about this storytelling, National Storytelling Festival down in Tennessee. So they would invite different storytellers from around the world, and they would perform for the weekend. Came down and watched some stories and listened to them and stuff. And I was like, that was pretty cool. That's amazing. And so I ended up going, coming back to the college to visit and see it. It was the only college in the world that offered a master's degree in storytelling at the time,
Wow.
East Tennessee State University, as you mentioned. And so I ended up saying, you know what? This sounds fun. Like I have one degree in outdoor recreation, so I have a degree in how to play. And I was like, I want a degree in how to tell stories. So like a master's in telling
Yeah.
stories. So I
Wow.
ended up, yeah, moving down to Tennessee. I was living in Wisconsin at the time, and so we just fell in love with the area. We really love it here in Eastern Tennessee, and I guess I finished that in '97, and so I started to travel and tell some stories. But I had well, actually three little girls at the time. And I didn't want to be gone all the time whenever they were growing up, be on the road 300
Yeah.
days a year or something like that. So I was like, how can I stay home, still tell stories, and be a dad, but also be a storyteller? And that's how I turned to writing.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so I've written a lot of different types of books over the years, mostly the last decade, suspense novels.
Hmm.
But before that, I actually wrote some books on how to tell stories to different age students. So I've written books on how to tell stories to preschool children, and I write serial killer novels. So
Yeah.
basically, my wife says it's like inviting Stephen King over to do a puppet show for your kindergarten class. So
Yeah.
basically, that's what's going on inside my mind. It's always stories, though. It's like
Yeah.
whatever maybe the audience might be different, adults, kids, whatever, but trying to tell or write an engaging story that people will enjoy. Maybe that they can't guess the ending to. Like I really like twists. It's kind of
Yes.
one of the things that I
I've
like to
never
do.
guessed one.
Yeah. And so try to find a twist and tell the story, entertain people, and it kind of just turned out to be that way. So
Wow. Well, that's yeah. That's definitely a crazy roller coaster route to
yeah.
becoming an author. I didn't know that full story. So the Bowers Files is how I found you. For those of you listening or aren't familiar with Stephen's work, the Bowers Files is the 11-book suspense crime thriller series that follows FBI agent Patrick Bowers as he solves violent crimes using geographic profiling. Although he wouldn't prefer the title of profiler, I highly recommend it to anyone. That's a series that got me hooked. Am I correct in saying that that's kind of the series that really puts you on the map?
Yeah, I'd say so. The first book that I wrote in that series is called The Pawn, like a chess piece.
Hmm.
And so then I wrote The Rook, The Knight, The King, Queen, Bishop, Checkmate, Opening Moves, kind of the whole gamut, and a couple of spin-off stories as well with that series. And I think it's probably sold about 1 million copies or something like that over
Yeah.
the last 20 years. So it's not like extraordinary, like it went crazy and sold like 100 million or something. But yeah, it's still cool to be able to say, that a million people are reading the books out there, and
Yeah.
so yeah, it's been super interesting, and like you mentioned, it's like geographic profiling or whatever. Basically, he doesn't look for means, motive, and opportunity. Hates profiling and has
Yeah.
nothing to do with DNA, and so it's like, well, what does he do? Well, he studies, the timing, progression, and location of crimes and is able to then kind of work to locate where the killer might be based out of, and maybe killer or arsonist, and different stories. So it was super interesting because when I started the series back in, I guess, 2005 or so,
Hmm.
there really hadn't been any TV shows or novels that really explored that aspect of criminal investigation. So it was pretty exciting to try something completely different, that no one else was really doing at the time. And so it's been fun to follow. One of the things that I never expected was that research would be interesting to me. Like,
Yeah.
I thought it would be kind of boring, but I've been able to tour the FBI Academy a couple of times doing research, visit the Pentagon a few times, and just meet with scientists and FBI agents and just an amazing group of detectives, doing research. So I actually look forward to that now. And I'm starting a new book. I'm like, I'm going to meet amazing people and they're going to, share with me insights and secrets about what they do. And I'm
Yeah.
going to tell stories with it. So that's been fun.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things about those books in particular, and you wouldn't know it for those of you watching just by looking at Steven, but he crafts the most evil villains, the most meticulous and twisted villains of all time. And one of your writing styles, one that I used to try and emulate when I thought I was going to be a suspense novelist, is switching perspectives during your writing. And all of a sudden, book cuts off, and now we're in the villain's perspective, and now we're looking through his eyes. How do you create these villains? What has inspired you to create these villains and these plot lines? Because it's one thing to craft the hero, right? Like,
Yeah.
there are certain cliches, and though the protagonist from these books, Patrick Bowers, has a lot of unique things, there are certainly, cliches surrounding. It's always going to be that way with a hero.
With the hero.
Um, but with the villain, I feel like each one was so unique and different, and also I never knew who it actually was towards the end.
That's
Like,
good.
what is your inspiration for those?
Well, I basically, when I create a character, when I'm working with a character, I basically say, what would this character do if I stepped out of the way? And so, like, I don't try to so much like stick a leash on the character and lead them around through the story, but instead say, okay, look, I'm going to cut the leash. I'm going to give you free reign. And then I write kind of from their perspective what they might be thinking or doing. And sometimes it's startling and sometimes it's terrifying. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's what this character would, be thinking in this moment. That's what they would be doing. And, you know, trying to step into the mindset like that of some, pretty dark characters is it can be tough sometimes, honestly.
Yeah.
So because I do kind of feel what the characters are feeling and so on like that. So there have been a few times where one time I actually had to set a book down while I was writing The Night, the third
Yeah.
Patrick Bowers book. I actually had to set it down because it was troubling me so much, like the villain was, and then I had to
Oh
come
yeah.
back to it after about a month later. So
Wow.
yeah, so
Man.
and as far as the twists and the characters go, like I don't always know. Like with The Night, actually, I thought I knew who the bad guy was going to be when I was writing the book.
Yeah.
But I got down to like the third day before it was due to my publisher. Actually,
Wow.
it had been due like June 1st, then July 1st, August 1st, September 1st, October 1st, November 10th. They're like, we really need this November 10th. I'm like, yeah, no problem. I'll get it to you, stuff.
Yeah.
So it's literally like November 7th, and I'm like, crap, I do not know how to finish this book. And so I was flying out to speak at some sort of conference, and as I'm on the airplane, I'm like, I know what the problem is. I have to change who the killer is. And so
Mm.
I was like, that's gonna like create so much more work though if I do that. So I landed in Cincinnati and I called my editor and I said, I've got some good news. This book's gonna be even better than we thought. Like, oh, I'm glad to hear that. I said, I gotta change who the killer is. And there's this long pause, from the other side. And so finally she goes, all right, I trust you as long as it'll be a better book. So, but it took another month or two to rewrite the book.
Wow.
I had to create a new character, change the clue progression, everything. But I think it was worth it because so far, in the last, like 15 years, no one's written to me and said, I totally figured out who the bad guy was in The Night. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so I knew that if I kept who I had originally, it would have been too easy to guess. And so I was like, I got to change it to something else.
I
And,
yeah, I've
yeah, it was a lot of
certainly
work, but I really kind of liked where it went.
yeah, I mean I certainly have always guessed wrong. One thing I want to talk about, you mentioned you have a new book coming out, Broker of Lies. This is the start of a new thriller series
Yeah,
for you. And I wanted to ask, you had a successful, like we mentioned, 11-book series with the Bowers Files. I'm sure you have such attachment to those characters. What is it like putting pen to paper, knowing that you're starting that road all over again with a new suspense series, not only just from the author standpoint, but from the fan perspective, from me, I have expectations now,
yeah.
I've read through one of these series, what has that been like?
Well, I lived with Patrick. Basically, it takes me about a year to write a book. Okay,
Yeah.
so I lived with Bowers and his crew for over 11 years, really. And but I felt like I didn't want to keep writing Patrick Bowers books if they would end up sort of being repetitive of earlier storylines. Like I didn't want them to become cookie cutter books where you're like, oh, I remember he used the same idea 10 books ago or something. So I was like, when I hit the 11th book, I was like, okay, I feel like they're all fresh and different stories. They're all really unique. But right now, if I wrote another one, it would end up kind of going over the same kind of territory I've done.
Okay.
And so I was like, I need to take a break. Maybe I'll go back to it. I don't have any problems with that. I'm interested in that. But at the time, so I had this new idea of a guy who works for the Defense Department as a redactor. So he works basically in the Pentagon, the basement of the Pentagon, and he scours over Department of Defense files. And when a Freedom of Information Act comes in, he's basically the guy to say, okay, this can get released to the public. This needs to be redacted out and like blacked out and stuff. So, but he's got this like amazing memory. So all he does for 15 years is study the most top secret files that the Department of Defense has. So he basically knows all our secrets. And well, the Russians find out about that. And so he ends up on the run, has to stop a terror attack, and ends up kind of with a love interest and the whole thing. So it was super interesting to have this character and then start to add in stuff that I didn't feel like anyone had really ever done before. Like I'd never have run into a book or movie that has a redactor as the main character.
Yeah.
But it's been fascinating, and so he ends up with this other guy, Gunnar Bain, who's the romance writing ex-military guy, and kind of this kick-ass young woman who worked for the Secret Service for a while, and now she's a freelance, uh, basically bodyguard. And so anyway, the three of them kind of form this team. They have to stop this dirty bomb from going off, and
Yeah.
so that's the first in the series. I'm working on number two now, and it's been super fun to explore and get to know kind of a new cast of characters. But yeah, the Bowers is still really close to my heart.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to it. I know it's available for pre-order now. Where can everybody pre-order it?
I mean, wherever you normally get books,
Okay.
online, or if you have a local bookstore, any bookstore, you say, hey, I want to pre-order this. It's not going to be out for a little while yet, but if you're looking for something right now, certainly pick up one of the stories and
Yeah.
check that series out while you're waiting for book.
Yeah, I would recommend it, jump right in with the with the pawn.
Yeah.
So hopping back into disc golf a little bit, one thing
Yeah.
I was curious about was, as the author, you have the power to write anything you want into your books, your hobbies, your interests, anything. I'm sure that some things probably do end up in your books from your life or personality traits in your characters and such. Has disc golf ever crossed your mind to make it into one of your novels?
It it has crossed my mind, and it hasn't felt like like so far the characters that I've had, it just hasn't seemed like the best route to take for certain activities and so on like that. But a few years ago, we were working on a pitch for Hollywood to see
Yeah.
if the Bauer series could be picked up perhaps as a television series and so on. So at the time, I was like, I'm going to make Patrick Bowers a disc golfer. Like, we're just going to do it.
Just
So
do it. Yeah.
yeah, so like in our pitch to Hollywood, he plays disc golf in his spare time. The show didn't end up getting made at the time, but I still have all my notes. I'm like, yeah, if we can get a show picked up, there's going to be a hobby I think that he has.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay. That's
I
good.
know,
I'm
right?
I'm
It's
I'm glad
fun.
to hear that. My next question was, do you think it could have been Patrick Bowers? Because I think that I could see it in his character, and I
Yeah,
think it kind of goes in line with the specialty coffee thing. Like
yeah.
that could kind of
He's
be
a
where that
coffee
falls.
snob for sure. I know, right?
Yeah. So that wow. Okay. That was actually another one of my questions was related to that series. I feel like for authors, um, getting to the big screen is like a huge leap.
Yeah,
Obviously, it can be huge, not just for the success of the books, but monetarily, it's obviously a big leap. What has been the process of I think the Bowers Files would certainly has certainly been your product that would be made for the big screen. It certainly has the legs, I think.
yeah.
What has been that process of trying to pitch that to TV, and has it been frustrating? A big learning experience. What has that been like?
Yeah, no, a few years ago, ABC Studios did option the pawn, so we were looking at possibly doing a show with them on that. That didn't end up working out, but we're back. Kind of my buddy and I, he's a producer in Hollywood. Anyway, so the two of us have worked up a pitch that we're actually right now kind of in this fall going out to sort of see if there's some interest at this time. It
Yeah.
feels like stuff has changed so much since the pawn was optioned a number of years ago, and with streaming services and so many options, I feel like it's a good time to kind of get out there.
Yeah.
There's like you said, 11 books. There's lots of intellectual property or IP that they look for, and it's just a unique character, kind of unique stories. And I sort of think and write visually.
Hmm.
In other words, like I sort of picture stuff as if it were a movie when I'm writing the
Yeah.
stories. So we'll see where things go. I'm kind of hoping that something might unfold in the next year or so.
Wow.
But yeah, we'll have to if something comes off to
All
come
right.
back
That yeah.
to fun. So
That would be great. I would certainly love that. If you had one thing I've always wondered, and my dad and I have actually debated about this,
oh no,
is you've got one pick from Hollywood from any A-list actor, anybody to play Patrick Bowers. I'm sure you've been asked this a million times.
yeah.
Who are you picking? Anybody. You can have anybody you want.
Well, okay. a few years ago, it might have been different, but right now, I think that I would pick the guy who plays the Winter Soldier,
Sebastian
Sebastian
Stan.
Stan.
That is a good pick. Okay.
Yeah, he's kind of got this. He's athletic, he's skilled in this way, but he's also kind of got this dark, haunted sort of look to him, which I feel like is important for Bowers. And he's kind of intelligent, but anyway. So yeah, I was thinking about it. So he's another guy we've thought about is Matt Bomer. So he's another actor, and so one of the two of those guys would be amazing if they were interested. I think
Okay. Yeah.
they're actors, and they both kind of have that haunted,
Yeah.
sort of intelligent, kind of dark look or whatever. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I think no, it's cool to just hear like because like everybody pictures your characters in their own way, but I think
yeah,
it's cool to hear how the actual original picture of the character was intended, and that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
So one thing I wanted to do you have your disc golf bag with you?
Yeah. Actually, I've got it right here.
So I'd love to get some insight
Oh my
into
God.
what you're throwing.
Okay.
We don't need we don't need to go through like a whole in the bag, but let's
No.
just get like your go-to molds for like putters, mid ranges, and drivers.
All right. I throw almost all um, Trilogy plastics, so mostly
Okay.
Latitude and Pure is my putter.
Very nice.
I almost only throw Pures. Sometimes for understable, putts, Swan. It's a good one.
Yeah, yeah,
But so yeah, so that's kind of where I go to for putts, and then mid range. You can't really see it anymore, but it's a warship. I love a
yeah.
warship
Good
for an
disc.
approach, and then also let's see, kind of the other mid range I go to is a truth,
Yeah.
and so I like those guys. And then as far as drivers, the thing is, I kind of throw, I kind of throw this king quite a bit,
Okay.
actually.
Okay.
Yeah, and then also toss a air opto ballista, which are hard to find now. They always make ballista pros,
Yeah.
which are a little more stable than I like. So I
Hmm.
like the opto air because it's a little more understable. And so yeah, if anyone out there has an air opto ballista you're trying to get rid of,
It
you let us know for
it's
sure.
funny because every guest I have on that I talk about discs with them, there's always
Yeah,
one mold that they can't get
I
anymore,
can't
and
find it
they're
anymore.
asking for people to send to them. So
But
here we go. All right, the Opto
yeah,
Air Ballista.
yeah,
Okay.
and then sapphire. I like sapphires too. So.
Yeah. So what drew you to Trilogy Plastic? How come that's what you really throw? Just stuck with it?
Yeah, like I kind of got into it when I got started, and a friend of mine was throwing. He putted with a pure. I really liked it. And then there's a local pro who was sponsored for a while, and he threw trilogy stuff, and so I kind of just drifted in that direction, and then I kind of became like I'm not an advocate so much as it's just what I throw. So, other people like, have you ever tried this thing? I'm like, no, actually, I only stick to,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well,
it's kind of where I go. So,
what is it to like when you're looking for new disc golf discs? Like, what is it that appeals to you? Are you looking for just cool looking ones, or just are you sticking to certain molds?
I like something that is a little bit understable for my arm speed. I
Hmm.
don't love stuff that's too stable because it ends up hyzering out on me. So, and like I said, my throw is a little old school. So I like stuff that is basically dependable, reliable, that I know how it's going to fly.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, so if there's something where, like, especially at Warship, I don't know, I just know how it's going to fly, and so I keep drifting back to it on mid-range shots.
Yeah, well, you're on the right side of things. Many people just try and they want to throw everything, and they get out of hand with what they can't handle, even though they think they can. So you're definitely you got the right mindset there. So I wanted to I like to get like power rankings lists on this show, and I like to kind of cater it to different people. So I saw that you tweeted out a picture of an ace that you had. Was that at the North Cove Social Club?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
North Pole. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so I noticed it because I had just been there a few weeks prior, and we played the Boulders course there, and that
Yep.
course was. I said it was I've played a lot of courses all over the country, and that course was my number one favorite disc golf course of all
That's
time.
yeah, excellent. Wow. Yeah.
It was incredible, the views. So I was just curious to get your top 3 disc golf courses.
Oh wow. Okay. So I would say North Cove is one of them.
Okay.
That's in North
Okay.
Carolina. And then I really love Harmon Hills, which is
Yeah.
here in Eastern Tennessee. So I play there whenever I can. And then the third one, um, I mean, Morristown has some really nice courses, Morristown, Tennessee. And so I think Cherokee there is one of my favorites.
Okay. I've played North Cove. I'm going to play Harmon Hills, I think, sometime later this year, and
Oh yeah.
I've heard of Cherokee as well. So good picks for sure.
Yeah, I mean
Um,
Cherokee is nice there. There's also Panther Creek, which is a pretty extremely difficult course in Morristown. I don't know that it's one of my favorites because it beats me up,
okay.
honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I have love-hate relationships with a lot of courses where it's like I know this is a good course, but I didn't really have fun playing it.
Yeah.
But anyway, Steven, thank you so much for joining the show today. It was really cool. I love having unique guests on here who come from different perspectives than just the disc golf background. And I hope everybody listening got a really cool perspective on somebody who plays disc golf as a hobby, but that's not what they do for a living. It's a kind of a different thing for this show. But yeah, thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and hopefully we'll see you out on the course somewhere.
All right, and thanks once again to Steven for joining the show. That was really cool talking to him. I mean, if you couldn't tell from how enthusiastic I was, that was a big deal for me just to be able to interview one of my literary heroes. But if that's, like I said, if that's kind of interview that you enjoy, if you really like having on unique guests that aren't necessarily part of the disc golf industry, just let me know in the comments below. And also, if there's guests that you'd like me to try and get for the show from disc golf or from without disc golf that, just like disc golf, let me know in the comments below too. I would love to have suggestions. I'm always looking for input on the show, and I really want to stress that the comment section I look at, and I always try to take that feedback and use it constructively. But other than that, we will have another good guest coming next Thursday. We're just going to keep having them one after another. We'll see you then.